Hello, I'm Dr Jodi Richardson, and you're listening to Well, Hello Anxiety, a podcast where we end the struggle with anxiety and build our toolkit of practical skills to thrive. Hello, lovely listeners. Welcome to an extra special episode. And to give you a personal insight into why today's conversation is especially important, I'd like to start by asking you to think about the last time a close friend or maybe even a family member was having a really hard time. Perhaps they were feeling distressed, they were going through some challenges or a challenge, and I want you to reflect on how you responded to them. Think about what you were thinking about what they were going through. What did you say? What did you do? If you can't recall a time recently, that's okay. Just imagine how you would respond to a friend who was with you here and now who was struggling. Now, so many of you write to me and share with me about the struggles that you are going through as individuals and as parents and as teachers and as practitioners. And so I know that we all have struggles in our lives, and I'm no different. What I'd like you to do now is to have a think about, what do you think? What do you say? And how do you treat yourself when you are the one struggling? I've asked you these questions because I really want to help you recognize where you're at so that you are in a better position to know what you need. And if you've realized that you treat others with more kindness and compassion than you share with yourself, which is so often the case, today's episode might very well be the one that both inspires and teaches you to share that very same kindness with yourself, opening the door to the most profound improvements in your mental and physical health and so much more. Because today's guest joining us from Austin in Texas for this episode is the wonderful Dr Kristen Neff. She is a pioneering researcher and the world's leading authority on self-compassion. She's an associate professor at the University of Texas, so it's afternoon in Texas at the moment. It's morning here in Melbourne. She's an author. She's co-founder of the nonprofit Centre for Mindful Self-Compassion and the Mindful Self-Compassion Training Program. Her work and the work of others who have built on her work has had a profound impact on psychology, mindfulness practices, and countless people the world over. So it is with much gratitude and great pleasure that I introduce you to Dr. Kristen Neff. And Kristen, I welcome you to the podcast.
Thanks, Jodi. Thanks so much for having me on.
Oh, it's just such a joy to be able to have this conversation with you. And what I'd love for you to do to start with is to start by explaining self-compassion, but also what brought you to your first experience of self-compassion, which was, I guess, the launch pad for all of the wonderful work that you've done over the past almost 20 years, isn't it?
More than 20 years.
More than 20 years. Yes, yes.
Yeah. Well, so it actually started for me back when I was in graduate school getting my PhD. It was a really stressful time in my life. I was about to finish my PhD. I didn't know if I would get a job or maybe I'd be overqualified. And I had also married young and divorced young. So I was feeling a lot of like shame and self-doubt and like a failure. And so I learned, I know that mindfulness meditation was supposed to be good for stress. So I went to a mindfulness course to learn this skill. And much to my amazement, the woman leading the course talked about self-compassion. You know, she talked about how it's really important to turn compassion inward, to treat yourself with kindness and support when you're struggling in some way, which I was. So, you know, it actually took me a while to learn how to meditate. But that very night when I went home from the course, it had never dawned on me to be intentionally nice to myself. So I said things like, okay, Kristen, I know you're stressed. I know you're worried. It's going to be okay. I'm here for you. You know, yeah, you made some mistakes, but it's only human. So I started talking to myself like I would naturally talk to a friend. And I was just so amazed at the immediate difference it made in my ability to cope. You know, it just gave me this incredible strength when I supported myself. as opposed to judging myself for all the mistakes I'd made.
Yeah.
And so when I did get a real job at University of Texas at Austin, I decided to study it. And so in order to study something, the first thing you have to do was define it. In terms of your question of what is self-compassion, well, one very easy way to think of it is treating yourself the way you would treat a good friend you cared about. So that little introductory inquiry you did with your audience, that's a really good way to think about what compassion is how you relate to your friend, and probably the lack of compassion is how you relate to yourself. But the good news is we have a template for what compassion and support looks like. So I also have a more scientific definition of self-compassion, which includes more than just kindness. It also includes mindfulness and a sense of common humanity. Another way to think of what self-compassion is if you go to the Latin roots of the word, passion means to suffer, com is with. So self-compassion is really, how are we with our suffering? Those difficult emotions, those fears, those anxieties, those, whatever troubling thoughts or emotions are arising in our mind. How are we with ourselves? Are we with ourselves in a supportive way, in a warm way, in a helpful way, or perhaps in a cold, judgmental, shaming way? And that's why self-compassion is so important, because it helps us be with ourselves in those difficult moments in a way that's actually supportive.
Which often with anxiety, one of the things that a lot of people really want to do is just get rid of it. I don't want it. I don't like it. It feels awful. And yet the irony is the more we struggle with it, the more we feel it and amplify it. And yet if we can have that acknowledgement, and I know that you'll talk us through a self-compassion practice, that we actually can help ourselves to cope a lot better with the anxiety that we live with and struggle with at times, and also help ourselves relieve a lot of the distress that comes with it by turning that kindness and compassion towards ourselves. So it's just such a powerful conversation. And I loved what you said before about, to be able to study something, you need to obviously be able to define it. You have to start by defining it. And then you've so beautifully described the 3 elements of self-compassion. I wonder if you could share those with us now.
Yeah. So self-compassion is more than simply kindness. There's also 2 other elements, which are mindfulness and a sense of common humanity. And so the mindfulness is really key. And it's not an accident that I learned about self-compassion while learning mindfulness. Because again, normally when we have a difficult emotion like anxiety arise, our tendency is to fight it or to make it go away. But what we know is that we, resist, persist, and grow stronger. It actually doesn't help if we don't allow an emotion to be there. And if we fight it or if we shove it inside of us, it usually just puts pressure on us and makes things worse. And so mindfulness is the ability to turn toward and make space for whatever we're feeling, right? So, but we want to do this with some balance. In other words, we turn toward it, we make space for it, we allow ourselves to feel what we're feeling. But we do it in a way that's not where we aren't lost in the negative thought or emotion. So usually we suppress or we dive into. We do one of these 2 extremes, and when we dive into a difficult emotion, we lose all perspective. We just think, the world's coming to an end. We get fused with the negative emotion. And so mindfulness allows us to be in that in-between space. So we're aware of what's arising, but we aren't fused with what's arising. And that allows us to have some distance and to make good choices. So that's really, you might say, the first step of self-compassion. And then the next step might be, giving ourselves kindness, warmth, and support because we're struggling, just like we would to a good friend. But there's a 3rd element that may not be so obvious, but what's really key to self-compassion and what differentiates compassion from pity, actually, or from self-pity, is a sense of connectedness to others. So, if I pity someone, I feel separate from them. I'm looking down on them. Or with self-pity, I feel like, woe is me, somehow that I'm the only one in the world going through this. Everyone else is leading a normal, perfect life. And It's just me who's experiencing this difficulty. And so one of the reasons that it's so hard to deal with difficult emotions is we judge ourselves for having them, and we feel isolated and abnormal because we have them.
Yeah.
But of course, difficult thoughts and emotions, struggling, suffering, this is what it means to be human. We aren't alone. quite literally, any emotion or thought you have, there are probably millions of people around the globe at this time having something very similar going on in their hearts and minds as well. And so compassion, if I have compassion for you, it means, hey, I've been there. So self-compassion, we remember that other people have been here as well. We aren't alone. There's nothing wrong with us for feeling as we do. It's part of the shared human experience. And so when we remember that, we feel connected, and that helps strengthen and empower us. So when all these three elements are together, we're mindful of our difficulty, we remember that we aren't alone, and we're being warm and supportive to ourselves because we're hurting, then that's, according to my definition, a state of self-compassion.
I really appreciate the reference to fusion with our thinking. I'm ACT trained, and I found that diffusion skills and learning to be able to notice what I'm thinking and observe what I'm thinking has been really powerful in helping me to manage my own anxiety and to be able to step back from what's happening for me in the moment and have a little bit more space. And I think perhaps one of the reasons we're hard on ourselves is because we look around and we think everyone else has got it together. But for somebody listening who is really experiencing a lot of pain at the moment and becomes really fused with their thinking, which means you really locked on and find it difficult to kind of step out of that kind of thinking and that spiral. What would you like to say to sort of really support some of those people through our conversation here?
Right. So, of course, it's easier said than done. But we really want to do two things. So the mindfulness movement and therapies like acceptance commitment therapy have been so useful in terms of helping us find ways to give us space from our difficult emotions. And that might mean by, focusing on your breath, or they find even just saying out loud what you're feeling helps you defuse from it so you aren't so caught up in it. So we want to have, as much as we can, bring space to what we're experiencing, remembering maybe those parts of ourselves that are having a different experience. We aren't totally this one negative thought and emotion. We've got multiple things going on. So focusing on how your feet are feeling, for instance, might be one way you can kind of give space to your difficult emotion. But space isn't enough. This is where the self-compassion comes in. We need space, but we also need warmth, right? Because there's a reason we're so fused with it. It's because it hurts and we want to make it go away. And the reason we want to make it go away is because we're in pain.
Yeah.
So not only do we want to bring space to what we're feeling, we also want to open our hearts. And you can say something to yourself like, it's really hard to be feeling this, and kind of call it. It's like if a friend said, I'm going through this. First of all, you'd want to listen to your friend. You don't want to just ignore them or shut them out, or you don't want to tell them they're a fool for what they're feeling. Same with ourselves. But we also want to show that we care. And that's what's going to help your friend feel safe. And the same with ourselves. So space and warmth work hand in hand. So sometimes, if you might say, just, okay, give space to your feeling of anxiety. You may be able to do that. But of course, anxiety means we feel afraid.
Yeah.
And if we just give space from it, a part of us is saying, no, if I don't solve the problem, something horrible is going to happen. Whereas warmth actually can more directly help us feel safe, like saying to ourselves, or that part of ourselves that feels that anxiety, hey, I'm so sorry. I'm here for you. I will not abandon you. I promise I won't abandon you. How can I help? What do you need right now? And that kind of helpful warmth, encouragement, support actually helps us feel safe. And that safety can help us give a little space to those emotions. So they work hand in hand. We need three things: space, warmth, and connectedness, right? So remembering that it's normal, we aren't alone. We're part of a larger whole. The way our brains work, especially in those difficult moments, is they're kind of designed to make us feel like, to create this sense of self, because the sense of self is the problem solver. But of course, the truth is we aren't really separate from others. We're impacted by our environment. We're impacted by the people. We impact others. We are part of a larger whole. We just don't realize it. So remembering our essential connectedness, moving from what I like to call our small self, that feels separate and limited, to our compassionate self is like a larger sense of self. It's a bigger sense of self. You might even think of it as your higher self or your spiritual self. I mean, people have different ways, or just your compassionate self. But this sense of self is bigger, it's connected, it's larger than just our small little selves. And this self is strong and capable and much more able to support us than maybe we even realize.
It's something that I've practiced since learning about your work when I studied the science of happiness some time ago. That was actually 10 years ago, I think, 2014, so 10 years ago. And I have practiced self-compassion, and I've recorded a solo episode 42, for anyone who would like to go back and listen. And it helps me feel so comforted. And the practice that I know you're going to share with us later, I really encourage those of you listening, because the benefits of self-compassion are extraordinary and extend across a whole range of very, very human challenges, and which I'd like you to share with those with us in a moment. But why is it so hard to be kind to ourselves? It's not necessarily something that comes naturally for a lot of people, and I imagine it's obviously, of course, to do with our personality and the way we were raised and how we were spoken to growing up. But for listeners who are thinking, gosh, this is something that sounds like it would be so powerful in my life and something that I know that would make a difference for me, but I have this really negative way I speak to myself. It's small steps, I know, always, and like you say, it doesn't always come easily. But for anyone who learns a self-compassion practice today and wants to get going but finds it hard, could you help normalize that, please?
Yes, absolutely. So, some people, when they learn about self-compassion, when they realize how self-critical they are, they start beating themselves up for beating themselves up. It's not only is it normal, it's actually seems to be our evolutionary heritage. So there are brain reasons why we tend to do this. So, and especially with something like anxiety. So, as I'm sure many of your listeners know, when we feel personally threatened, the system that evolved to pop in immediately is the fight, flight, or freeze response. It activates the sympathetic nervous system, cortisol, adrenaline, because we're threatened in some way. Now, this is really good for fighting off a lion who's attacking you, for instance. But when the threat is yourself because you failed or made a mistake, we tend to fight ourselves, right? We criticize ourselves as a form of the fight response, which is hopefully we're what we think is that we're going to control our behavior so that maybe we'll be safe, we'll make some change so we won't be threatened anymore. Or else if we beat ourselves up first, it won't hurt so badly. If others criticize us, these are safety behaviors. Or we flee into a sense of shame or isolation, right? We think kind of hang our heads in shame because we're afraid metaphorically of the judgments of others. Or we freeze and we get stuck and we ruminate. We get stuck in these loops because this is the natural instinct to freeze and play dead, as if somehow if you just don't move, the problem will go away. So these are all natural. It's actually when your good friend fails or makes a mistake, you aren't so personally threatened. So you don't go into fight, flight, or freeze mode. You tend to go use another safety system called the tend and befriend mode, or the care system. And this primarily evolved for infants and caregivers and for in-group members to care for each other to enhance safety. But it pretty much evolved to care for others, not so much for ourselves. For us, the first instinct is, I'm threatened, fight, flight, flee, or freeze. Whereas with others, our instinct is more to care. The good news is because both are natural, what we can do is we can do a little hack. So if you imagine, what would I say to a good friend in this situation? You can say that to yourself. So for instance, putting your own hand on your shoulder has the same effect on your physiology, lowering cortisol, for instance, as if someone else puts their hand on your shoulder. So our bodies don't really know the difference. So when we treat ourselves like we treat a good friend, or if we imagine what a good friend might say to us, we have these natural access points to compassion. Compassion is also natural. It just doesn't come online as easily with ourselves. We have to do a little extra effort. The effort is not doing it. It's actually not hard to be compassionate. The effort is remembering to be self-compassionate. And the other one is giving ourselves permission. And this is where culture or our early family upbringing plays a role. oftentimes our parents really controlled us through criticism and didn't give us permission to be kind to ourselves, weren't kind to us. So we've kind of internalized these beliefs that we aren't worthy of kindness, and that can definitely interfere. And also our culture, it makes us suspicious of self-compassion. It tells us you'll be weak if you're kind to yourself. You'll be lazy. You won't be motivated. It tells us all these things that are patently untrue about self-compassion. Actually, the opposite is true. It makes us strong. It makes us caring. It makes us more resilient, more motivated. But we have to fight against a lot of the currents that work against self-compassion.
And dispelling those myths as well that you've just touched upon, that by being compassionate to ourselves, that we're somehow going to rob ourselves of drive, motivation, or that idea that there's weakness or we're soft. And I really appreciate that you've touched on that here, because I really want this episode to be one that educates the beautiful global community of listeners to this podcast about not only what self-compassion is, but answer some of those questions that might pop up down the road as people start to practice it and start to think about bringing it into their life as a regular practice. And so, being able to talk about some of those myths now, I think is really important.
I'd love to. And also, if you don't have to even believe what I say, there's a ton of research on this. If you go to my website, selfcompassion.org, you can read about it. But so, for instance, the myth that it'll make you weak. Well, really, when you go into battle, what's going to make you stronger? If you are an ally to yourself, if you support yourself, if you ask yourself, what do I need? What would help? Or if you're an enemy, if you cut yourself down, if you shame yourself. Clearly, being your own ally, supporting yourself is going to help, not hurt. It's going to help strengthen you. And research shows, no matter what the challenge is, it could be combat, it could be COVID, it could be a hurricane. If you're kind and supportive toward yourself, you'll be more able to get through it. Some people think it's selfish. Quite the opposite. Compassion must flow inward in order to sustain giving it outward. You will burn out if all your compassion flows outward and you don't attend to your own needs. So it actually helps caregivers, for instance, helps healthcare professionals, helps parents be compassionate by sustaining their internal resources. But the biggest one is the belief that it'll undermine our motivation. And that's because self-criticism actually does kind of work as a motivator. Many of us have motivated ourselves by being really hard on ourselves. Unless you study for those exams or reach your sales target, I will hate myself, or I'll somehow shame myself. But it works the same way harsh criticism works to motivate children. Yeah, you can get a child to do what you want them to by criticizing them and shaming them and putting the fear into them that you won't love them if they don't do well. But you're going to also harm that child. Yeah. You're going to create unnecessary performance anxiety. You're going to create a fear of failure. You're going to undermine their self-confidence. The best way to motivate a child is to say, I believe in you. I'm here for you. How can I help?
Yes.
And hopefully we know that as parents or as teachers, but we need to get that message for ourselves. Love is a more powerful motivating force than fear. We still will want to reach our goals, but not because we're inadequate if we don't. It's simply because we care. We want to succeed. We want to be happy. We want to fulfill our potential. And if we fall a little short, doesn't mean that we are a failure. It just means, okay, what can I learn from this situation? So self-compassion creates what's called the learning and growth orientation, as opposed to just being worried about what does this success or failure say about me as a person.
Oh, I was having a conversation yesterday with a teacher. Most of my work is going into schools and speaking to senior students around exam stress and anxiety, speaking to parents about anxiety so they understand and know what helps, and delivering professional development around anxiety. And having a conversation yesterday with a teacher at a school, and we were talking just about that, about the pressure that a lot of students are feeling that is coming from home around performance, and just how that is translating into extreme anxiety. And there's a school refusal problem here in Australia, as there is in other parts of the world as well. And so I really appreciate that you've been able to share with us the difference that it can make in so many ways, and culturally and generationally, there are patterns, but we can learn and acknowledge patterns of the past and make changes once we learn what a difference an approach such as this one can make. And so one of the things that I've found in my own experience of self-compassion, and I understand that other people do too, is that when we turn that compassion on ourselves, we can feel quite emotional. And it can also make us feel almost a little teary. You know, when you're having a hard day, I'll never forget when a pet of mine had died, and I was teaching a long time ago as a teacher. And I was fine. I was back at school. I was going about my day until someone said, "How are you? Are you okay?" And I burst into tears because of the care and compassion someone showed me. And I've experienced those same kind of emotions when I've turned it on myself. So can you talk to listeners about that experience, if they haven't been compassionate to themselves in the past, what they might expect when they practice this for the first time, or perhaps that's something that we'll always experience when we practice it?
Yeah, so there's 3 ways you could expect to feel when you practice self-compassion. You might feel good, you might feel bad, and you may feel nothing.
Right. Okay.
And so self-compassion is really an attitude we have toward ourselves. It's not actually a particular feeling state. It's trying to turn toward whatever's happening with support and warmth. And what often happens when we do that, as you mentioned, is we give ourselves kindness and warmth. And what comes up is we actually feel bad. We may even feel worse. There's a term for this we have called backdraft. And that's a firefighting term, which is, you know, if a house is on fire and you fling open the doors of that house, the fresh air rushes in and the flames rush out. And that can actually happen with self-compassion practice. It's like we've closed the doors of our heart just to survive. And sometimes we have to, right? You got to work, you got to, you know, put one foot in front of the other. So you shut down your heart to get through and to survive. And then you start to open the doors of your heart and the fresh air of the love rushes in. And often the pain rushes out, the old pain rushes out. Now, sometimes it can feel scary, or you may think you're doing it wrong if you expect to feel good with self-compassion practice. But actually, it's a good sign, because what it means is the pain is being released. The pain has to be released in order to be processed and to be healed. If we just keep it locked up inside of our body, it will just create all sorts of like problems in our unconscious or physical health problems. We never allow ourselves to heal. So in order for the healing process to occur, we need to bring awareness to the pain that we have inside of our hearts. However, we also don't want to do it in a way that's destabilizing or re-traumatizing. You know, sometimes we need to go slowly. Maybe just open your heart a little bit and then close the doors again and go step by step. So it actually is a good sign. It means the healing process has begun. And so don't be surprised if you do feel worse when you start to practice self-compassion. But the self-compassion isn't causing the pain. The self-compassion is just bringing the light of loving awareness to the pain that's already there. And then if you go at a pace that feels safe and comfortable, eventually that pain will start to heal when held in the, you know, the loving connected presence, which is, by the way, what the 3 components of self-compassion are: mindfulness, common humanity, and kindness. So it's a good evocative term. When you hold your pain in loving, connected presence, eventually it starts to heal, and then you can finally release it, and it's not trapped inside of you anymore.
I love the metaphor of the closing the door on how we feel, and we do that when we have to get up and go to work, or we're parenting, or we're caring for someone, or we have tasks that just need to get done, and the idea that we can then go back and open it when we've got the time, when we've got the space. And it's a service to ourselves. It's a kindness to ourselves to do that. And recently, I haven't shared here on the podcast, but recently I had a surgical procedure. I didn't respond very well. I had some concerning news as a result of it that took the wind out of me, and I was physically and emotionally in a really difficult place. And I spoke to a beautiful friend of mine the next day, and she held me and supported me and listened and validated and shared so much love and compassion. And we agreed that the very best course of action for me would be to actually clear the week ahead. And that meant making some really big decisions about cancellations for speaking at a conference, traveling interstate, and really letting people down, which is the opposite of what I love to do in my life. And it was the first time, I think, ever that I've really stopped and put myself first and kind of really cleared the decks and gave myself the time and the space to really feel it and start processing and cry if I needed to, share compassion with myself. I did some tapping, which is a practice I learned through a wonderful researcher here in Australia, Dr Peter Stapleton, and feel it to heal it, name it to tame it, gave myself the time and space. I really opened that door, and the profound change that occurred over that week showed me that I'd done exactly what I needed, as hard as it was to put myself first and to seemingly let others down. I think it was a real lesson to me, and the metaphor that you've shared is one that'll always stay with me now about opening and closing that door, and the idea of the backdraft as well. It really helps to paint a really important and very clear picture for all of us who want to make this a very regular part of our lives. One of the things that I've learned through reading so much of the research, yours and that of your academic colleagues, thousands and thousands of papers. I've not read all of them, but I have read some of them. And I've recently read your review, your 2023 review. And it's just incredible to learn that self-compassion, whether it's through an intervention or whether or not it's through looking at levels of self-compassion and assessing whether or not somebody's suffering in certain ways, stress, anxiety, depression, that the findings are showing that it's linked to less stress, anxiety, depression, loneliness, suicidal ideation, PTSD, eating disorders, body image concerns, self-harm, shame. There's an increase in happiness and life satisfaction. The depth and breadth of the research is extraordinary. And I wonder whether or not there's any application of self-compassion in an area of mental or physical health and well-being that surprised you, that kind of took you by surprise when you learned that, self-compassion makes a difference here as well?
Yeah. So the research is just amazing. And by the way, just one surprising finding early on was that even though it's by definition how we relate to suffering, the fact that self-compassion is linked to so many positive emotions like happiness and optimism and hope. Well, it makes sense if you think about it, because compassion's a positive emotion. It feels good when we have kindness in our hearts and we feel present and connected. But one area that surprised me was a lot of researchers, especially actually in Canada, it's where most of the academics are who study this, found that self-compassion really helps athletes. And so actually I had a dissertation student who wanted to study what would happen if we taught self-compassion to athletes. So athletes, they need to be at the top of their game. They need to be special and above average just to keep their scholarships or their profession, right? So most athletes are really tough on themselves. But what the research shows, and in the study we showed, we did as well, that if you teach athletes to be compassionate toward their mistakes or failures in a training routine, and by the way, for an athlete, it is not compassionate to say, oh, your performance is fine if it's not. The most compassionate thing to say is, okay, yeah, that you need to work on this. This could be improved. But it's really the attitude with which you give the feedback. Is it like, how can I help you? I believe in you. This through encouragement, or if it's through like you're stupid or you're lame or you're a failure because you didn't do this. So we taught athletes how to treat themselves like a really good, told them to imagine an ideally supportive, compassionate coach who saw things very clearly, who gave them very good, constructive, detailed, informative feedback on their training routine or their performance. And what we found is not only did it increase their well-being, it actually increased their performance.
Did it really?
They could take in that information more effectively when it came from a place from self-care as opposed to self-judgment.
Yes.
So that was surprising. So now some like pro teams are starting to become interested, and it's it's really amazing to see where this may go.
Kristen, thank you for sharing that. I was really intrigued to know what did surprise you about the application, and I really hope that anyone listening who's connected with a sporting team, whether that's at grassroots, weekend warrior level, or through to elite sport, please share this with the people in your community, because this is really, really important research, and it can profoundly change the way people are approaching their coaching, for example, as one example. I'd really love for you to guide us through a brief self-compassion practice, please, so that listeners who have never had the opportunity to listen to one of your guided practices, you have many on your website, has an opportunity now to listen and tune in and experience it. Is that something that you could do for us, please?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
I would love to lead what's called a self-compassion break. And it's very simple. We just intentionally bring in the three elements of self-compassion: mindness, a sense of common humanity and kindness to ourselves, and some difficulty in our life. And the reason we call it a self-compassion break is because often what happens when something difficult occurs, we go into this negative spiral. We start judging ourselves, we start feeling all alone, and then kind of down we go. So this is, you might think of it as a break in that process, so we can reset ourselves, like pressing reset on the computer. And it's also a break in the sense of, we just maybe take a 5-minute break in whatever we're doing to give ourselves some compassion, and it can make a big difference.
Thank you.
Okay, so if you feel comfortable, it may help to close your eyes so you can go inward. Before we launch into this practice, just take a moment to settle into your body, right? Become present. So notice maybe the feeling of your feet on the floor or the weight of your body on your chair. Okay, so I would invite you to think of something in your life that is causing you some stress or anxiety or discomfort. Please don't think of anything that's really distressing or even traumatic, because if you're really focused on that issue, you won't be able to learn the practice. But something that's moderately anxiety provoking or uncomfortable. This could be some feeling of inadequacy you have, or maybe a worry you have about the future. Maybe a relationship issue. So again, think of this situation. You should feel moderately uncomfortable when you think about this, but not super distressed. If you feel, again, really distressed, please think of something else. Okay, so what we want to do first is use mindfulness to turn toward and be with our discomfort by giving it some space, right? So just becoming aware of the fact that this is really hard, right? So we're turning toward the difficult thoughts and emotions without getting lost in them, so we have some space around them, but we're aware, we're present, we are with ourselves, we are listening to ourselves. This is hard. That's mindfulness. And then we want to remind ourselves of the humanity of what we're experiencing. Right? It may feel kind of like no one else feels this way, or something's wrong with me for feeling this way. Well, the truth is, there are probably hundreds of, perhaps even millions of people who are feeling something similar as you right now. These types of thoughts and feelings or experiences, they're part of being human. Right? You aren't alone. This experience actually connects you to other people. It connects you to your humanity, which is messy and uncomfortable. And then we want to bring some warmth, some kindness to ourselves. One way you may want to do that is through a physical gesture of kindness, maybe putting your hand on your heart or your face, or giving yourself a little hug if that feels comfortable. Just sort of physical touch that helps you feel supported, cared for. All right, and once again, just reminding yourself of your difficulty. And it's almost as if you are literally holding yourself in the midst of this difficult experience, Feel your own presence. Feel your own support through the warmth of your hand. Right. And then we're kind of switching into our compassionate self, our bigger self, our higher self, you may think of it as. And from this more resourced, more connected, more loving place, can you say any words of kindness and support to yourself? Whatever suits you in this situation. Maybe it's some words of acceptance. You're doing the best you can. It's okay to make mistakes. This is how we learn. Or maybe they're just words of support. I'm here for you. I'll do my best to help me get through this. This too shall pass. And if it's a little difficult to know what to say, you can always imagine, well, what would I say to a dear friend who is experiencing the exact same thing I'm experiencing? Might take a moment to imagine that were the case. In the same situation, having the same feelings and thoughts. What would you naturally say to your friend to express your warmth and support and care, encouragement? Your wisdom. Then can you try saying something similar to yourself? And if that just feels too awkward, you could also imagine, well, what would an ideally kind and compassionate friend say to you? Give yourself permission just to let in that compassion. Okay, and then letting the practice go. And so I led a long version of the self-compassion break, but Jodi, you can do that in 30 seconds. Like, this hurts. I'm not alone. I'm here for myself. What do I need? Yes. It doesn't have to be so long and drawn out. But
I do appreciate you taking the time to give our listeners this beautiful experience, and also one that they can come back to. So listeners, you can come back to this episode, you can replay that and use that to guide you as you develop your own practice. And as you were saying, Kristen, that it can be done in the moment. And as you said at the beginning, that it's remembering to use it. And when we're so anxious, we can become so focused on the threat, so focused on the fear, that we can't often tap into the skills and the practices that we know can make a difference for us, whether that's through the breath or through our grounding, through the body. And a self-compassion practice falls under that category. So I guess my last question to you before we ask how people can connect more with your work and the Centre for Mindful Self-Compassion, is a reminder, is a sticky note a good idea on a laptop, or a reminder around the house? How do you support people or recommend people remind themselves to draw on this practice and make it a part of everyday life?
Yeah, so any way you can find to help you remember. Sticky notes you can do, joining a community of others. Like, for instance, I have a self-compassion community online. It helps when other people remind you. I just want to make a point, kind of, especially for people with anxiety, which is another way to help integrate it. What can sometimes happen when we practice mindfulness, for instance, is that part of us that feels the anxiety and feels the fear is afraid that we aren't going to listen to it because now we're like meditating or doing something else. And so that's partly why sometimes these parts take over the system, because they think they're being ignored or not listened to. So one way to help is just to say to that part of yourself that feels the anxiety, for instance, I listen to you. I hear you. I believe you. I'm going to do everything in my power to help you feel safe. And so just kind of giving that reassurance to those parts actually helps them relax a little bit so that they don't need to take over the system. So part of the reason we don't remember is because these other parts of us are so busy trying to keep us safe that they don't give us any room to remember things like self-compassion. Yes. So the more we can do to help those parts feel heard and listened to, actually the more space they'll give for our compassionate voice to shine through. That's something that internal family systems therapy talks a lot about, and I found it to be very true with self-compassion practice.
Oh, thank you. I so appreciate that added insight, because it's the absolute truth of it. We can spiral when we're highly anxious, and yes. So that insight is really powerful. It's about really telling ourselves that it's okay, because the threat that our brain is so often responding to is a challenge, an opportunity, something new. It's not always something that's actually dangerous. In fact, most of the time it's not. And so thank you, Kristen. You've so generously shared a snippet of your wonderful wisdom and expertise, over 20 years of research. We've had such a beautiful conversation, and I'm very, very grateful to you for your time and for sharing so generously with me and with this beautiful community of the podcast. Where can listeners go to learn more? So I know that you've got the 2 websites. So if you could please invite our listeners into your communities and share those web addresses and where they can connect with you on whether or not it's on X, formerly Twitter, or Instagram, so that our listeners can go straight there and continue to learn from you and the work that you're doing.
Great. So probably the easiest thing to do is just Google self-compassion. You'll find my website, which is selfcompassion.org. And I do have this community people can join, and I have gatherings once a month. We have a lot of online resources for people there. They can also go to the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion website, which is the nonprofit I co-founded if people want to take training in self-compassion. I have books. I just have a ton of resources available. The easiest thing is just start with a Google search on self-compassion, or, in Instagram or Facebook, and you will find me.
That you will. And I really encourage you as listeners to explore this, to practice it, to try it on for size, and experience the difference that it can make. Like with everything that I share on the podcast, we have so much knowledge, but it's about making a choice to try something different, put it into practice, and experience the practice, and what you'll notice as a result of doing it will, I imagine, encourage you to create a regular self-compassion practice and remind yourself to draw on this as a way to support yourself and to teach it to others in your family and your friendship circles as well. So, Dr. Kristen Neff, I am so grateful to you. I really appreciate your time, your generosity, and your kindness for the world, for us here today, but for the world, because the work that you're doing is making a profound difference to the lives of people everywhere. You've made it so accessible, and I just want to say thank you to you for what you've done for us here today, but also what you're doing for humanity, because it's really important and we need it more than ever. So I'm very grateful.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to connect with your audience. Thank you, Jodi.
Thank you so much. And listeners, thank you. Thank you for your time. As always, I always love being with you, and I really would love to hear what you've experienced as a result of listening to this episode. So join me over on Instagram, share with me your experiences, and don't forget to let me know if there are any particular topics you'd like for me to talk about here on the podcast. So thanks again for your time, and I can't wait to be back with you again next week. Okay, bye. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave a review. To keep the conversation going, I'd love you to join me over on Instagram. You'll find me at Dr Jodi Richardson. Also, if you'd like a copy of my free 5-day mini email course, Calm Your Anxious Brain, then jump over to my website, drjodirichardson.com, and you can sign up down the bottom. I've really enjoyed having your company. Thanks so much. See you next time.